In 2003, I created the Phone Trips song. And right up front, I put this.
Warwick? Warwick? Hello?
Because I knew that Warwick, New York was going to be the subject, or at least connecting subject, of a series that I was going to do. It's now 2016, that's 13 years later, and the Warwick series is finally coming to fruition. Now, why did I want to do a series revolving around Warwick, New York? It's because there was a chain of events that just makes a nice journey. It's a journey that starts in 1974. I am at my Long Island home. I have just come back from having spent 2 school years at a commune in Virginia. I come back and I don't have my own phone line. I'm living with my folks again. I have their Lynbrook 3 Crossbar 5 phone line. And there's a lot to record. One of the things that I'm recording is calls going through, and mostly not completing, to the 914 NPA. The reason I'm recording it is that the routings to the 914 NPA have not been modernized at all. My New York City routings have been completely changed, and that change to me was a great loss. I've discussed this elsewhere, but the 914 routings are the same as they always were. And so I'm recording routings to the 914 NPA, and it's during that process that I first encounter Warwick, New York, a small independent telephone company. Probably it's a real mom and pop, especially when you see what brought them to my attention, which is that the phone company is giving a toll-free announcing machine to the local school district, just out of the goodness of their heart, or maybe the guy who owns the phone company is the school principal. I don't know, but that's what I discover in program 2 of this series. This program is the first half of the phone calls I was recording when I discovered Warwick, so we won't get to Warwick in this program. What we will get to are a lot of calls to the 914 NPA over N1 carrier, which is this really eerie and cool analog multiplexing system that was used on long local calls and short long-distance calls. You wouldn't get it calling across the country. You wouldn't even get it calling to the far parts of New York State. But you did get it calling to the 914 area, which I'll try to describe to you. The 914 area starts just at the top of New York City. It is what's on the other side of the Bronx. There are some subway lines that go high into the Bronx, and if you go to the last stop and then walk a few blocks, you'll go across the border out of New York City into Westchester County. And I actually did that to record the Mount Vernon #1 crossbar office. Mount Vernon actually used to have panel. Ben and I didn't record it in time, it was gone, but we did get the crossbar 1 on tape. From Mount Vernon you can call down into New York City for 10 cents. Southern 914 was like this, urban, almost a continuation of New York City. Now Mount Vernon has 2 crossbar tandems in this very same building, and I feel I should make some calls through those 2 crossbar tandems now. They are an integral part of 914's local and long-distance network, but from a Long Island crossbar 5 perspective, they are eclipsed by another nearby tandem.
My favorite XBT, the very first XBT I found, that told me what whistling off a trunk really meant, good old White Plains 1, otherwise known as 9144.
Exactly, and from Long Island crossbar 5s, you just don't get Mount Vernon tandems. So, here's a call through Mount Vernon Tandem 1, recording ID 9145, although we've never heard it. After I dial the 3rd digit, the revertive pulse conversation between this crossbar 1 and Mount Vernon Tandem number 1 will begin with some high-pitched pulsing that sounds like this, sending the number in a coded way to Mount Vernon Tandem 1. which then makes us wait on our register sender while it's dial pulsing the last 4 digits into the step PBX for long lines in White Plains. So you'll hear 7 digits of RP over the course of my dialing, then a pause while it's dial pulsing, and then it'll cut through and ring. Mount Vernon Tandem 2,
91410.
also in this building, is used by 914 to call New York City and Long Island. Here's a call to a disconnected code in Brooklyn. The MFs you're hearing are the sound of Mount Vernon Tandem 2 in this same building, MFing to Bushwick Tandem. If you listen carefully, you can hear the MFs have a lot of high-frequency content. And that's a characteristic of hearing a crossbar tandem that's in your same central office building MFing out.
Right on 40, what number?
696-9696.
The number you dialed, 696-9696, is not a working number. Please consult your directory and dial again. This is a recording. Please consult your directory and dial again.
In the parts of 914 that are near New York City, you do not dial 1 first. In fact, if you dial 1 first, it won't even break dial tone. But as you get up into higher 914, even New York Telephone is going to ask you to dial 1 first.
This is a recording. For calls outside your local calling area, it is necessary to dial the digit 1 before the number.
And the reason they do that is that there are step offices in the environment. Such as this one, Patterson 878. And steps have to dial 1 first. So if you're calling from a Crossbar 5 office that has rural steps nearby, they're going to make you dial 1 first. So that's the way 914 is. It just stretches from urban through suburban into rural. And it also includes some independent telephone companies. The following was recorded on the ground from a place in the 914 area.
This is a recording from Chester, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Chester, New York.
Some of you will recognize that as the 102 director system, so this is 914 as well. There's a lot of diversity in the stuff that's on the ground. Now, I'm at my parents' house in western Nassau County, Long Island, calling all of 914, urban, suburban, rural, and independent, over these wonderful N1 carrier trunks to a tandem known as White Plains Tandem 1. There was a code you could dial in the 914 area that, instead of being intercepted locally, would go through to White Plains Tandem 1 and you'd get its recording.
9144. I'm sorry. We are unable to complete your call as dialed. Please check the number and dial again, or ask your operator for assistance. This is a recording. 9144.
Now right there you can see how N1 carrier has a byproduct, and that is that certain background tones sort of sing along with the sound that's being conveyed, so that something that more or less starts out sounding like this
I'm sorry. We are unable to complete your call as dialed.
becomes this.
I'm sorry. We are unable to complete your call as dialed.
Here's a call that I made specifically just to record the background noise of the N1 carrier from Lynbrook 3 to White Plains 1.
I've just dialed 914-949-9963, which is a balance test going through N1 carrier to White Plains. So here I'm going to record a minute of N1 carrier and crossbar 1 noise.
Here's another call where I did the same thing, except it was at a really quiet time and not much could be heard except the basic N1 noise. Each trunk sounds different, by the way. This program and the next contain calls made from Lynbrook 3 to the 914 area, and all of those calls go over these N1 carrier trunks to White Plains Tandem 1, except for a few cases where the White Plains trunks are busy, and I'll cover that when we get to it. Here's a call to 914 Directory Assistance during the last days of Directory Assistance being free.
Church, you may help you.
Yes, from Monticello.
Monticello?
Uh-huh.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me what any two of the prefixes there are?
Monticello?
Uh-huh.
One moment, sir. For Monticello, the number is, prefix is 794.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Here's a call to what I think is an old verification number, 9901, as the last 4 digits in the White Plains crossbar 5. Years ago, an operator would answer this number. Now, the ring just trips and is replaced by an audible ring tone, which continues indefinitely. The White Plains building has a pseudo-modern ringing machine. can see how that is the modern ring frequencies, but you can hear also ring current mixed in with it. And this is the kind of ringing machine they were installing in the late 60s and 70s as well. This came from the number 5 crossbar in the White Plains building. Here's a call to the number 1 crossbar, known as WH9. WH stands for White Plains.
May I have the number you're calling, please?
949-9950.
Thank you. I'm sorry, 9499950. There's no such number, sir. Check with information.
Thank you.
Right.
There were other New York telephone buildings in 914 that had pseudo-modern ring, though none with number 1 crossbar like White Plains. Here's a number 5. This goes out from White Plains on N1 carrier, so we know it's not Scarsdale, but I don't know what office this is. Here's a pseudo-modern reorder from Marlborough, New York, another crossbar 5. This is in the Newburgh sector, but White Plains has direct trunks. There's a very odd sound on every other impulse. Listen carefully. Boy, that's weird. White Plains Tandem 1 itself has a modern-sounding reorder, again from that same kind of pseudo-modern ringing machine. Here's a call to something in 914 where White Plains 1 encountered busy circuits and dumped me into the reorder trunk. White Plains Tandem 1 was a fairly old crossbar tandem. Installed in 1950, it only had 8-digit capability, which is fairly rare. Most crossbar tandems can handle 11 digits. The 8th digit, by the way, is for the old party line letter, as in Lynbrook 3 8669J, my parents' phone number in 1947. Lynbrook 3 was a manual before it was a crossbar 5.
Number, please.
As far as I know, there were no code conflicts between southern Westchester, New York City, and Nassau County, Long Island. So in 1950, you could probably use White Plains Tandem 1 to call into New York City or Long Island, just because area codes weren't being used in the local network. Now, by 1970, there were code conflicts between at least 2 of those 3 areas, and so White Plains, with its 8-digit capability, well, that really meant 7 digits. No more party line letters. It couldn't be used to call out of the area. So what they did is they took White Plains 1 and made it a 914 specialist. It became the default for crossbar 5s in Nassau County, crossbar 5s in New York City, and offices all over the 914 area to reach 914 points. And with all those offices using it as the first choice, it ended up with direct trunks to most of the offices in the 914 area. In fact, here is the stereotypical call to a New York telephone point from Lynbrook 3 to somewhere in 914.
Hello.
Sure beats Maryland. I made a bunch of calls without properly noting what office I was dialing, and a lot of them sounded like that. Here are a few of them one after another. Each of these ends up on a number 5 crossbar office that has number 5 crossbar type ring, and White Plains MFs directly to that office. On this next call, we get a trunk to White Plains 1 that has more howls, and then it gets what sounds to me like a 2600 controlled N2 or N3 trunk to the end office. Here's one that I know what is. It's the 831 exchange in Beacon, New York. This is a double N1 connection with a certain amount of resonance. Now here's how this and most calls in this presentation are going through. During this part of the call, we're connected to the local originating register in my Lynbrook 3 crossbar 5. After I dial the last digit, the originating register calls the marker. That sound is the OR calling the marker, and then the marker finds a path through Lynbrook 3's crossbar network and connects us to an outgoing trunk to White Plains 1. We're on the trunk, but we're not hearing it because there's an MF sender, and it has been loaded up by the marker with the 7 digits of the number we're calling. Once it has received the White Plains flash handshake, it'll spill the 7-digit number, then we are cut through. We're now hearing the trunk to White Plains 1, which has an unusually high amount of static. During this time, White Plains 1 waits for a flash from the office we're actually calling, and then it MFs the last 5 digits. When it's done, the White Plains 1 register sender drops out, and we are cut through. In this case, the sound of the ring is enough to drive the trunk into feedback. The next 2 calls are to a crossbar 5 with city ring. On the first, the trunk is about to go into feedback. On the second, it really does.
What number did you dial?
Here's a call to a crossbar 5 in Tuckahoe, and it has centralized intercept from Yonkers, I believe. Sounds like the trunk from White Plains to Tuckahoe might be T-carrier.
I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. This is a recording. I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. This is a recording.
May I have a number you're calling, please?
961-1111.
Thank you. 961-1111. I'm sorry, that is not a working number.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
We've been listening to calls going through to end offices in the 914 area via White Plains 1,
9144.
which then uses a direct trunk to the end office. The call goes through very quickly because the trunk from White Plains to the destination is MF operated. An exception was WH9, the number 1 crossbar in the same building. Those trunks use revertive pulsing. Now, when we're calling a step in all but the most far-flung sectors, again, White Plains just has direct trunks. Here's a call to Lewisboro. It's a 355 step owned by New York Telephone in the Mount Kisco sector. This is going to go through basically the same way, except it'll take a little longer because White Plains is dialing instead of MFing. As usual, you don't hear any outpulsing sounds. Now that type of reorder is called CDO reorder. Here are 2 calls to another office that has CDO ring. Here's another step. It's in North Salem, in the Mount Kisco sector. This sounds like a Bell System step with crossbar 5 type tones. Generally, you do not hear White Plains 1 outpulsing to the destination office, whether it's MFing or dial pulsing. But when it revertive pulses, you do hear it a little bit. Here's a call to Larchmont, New York, an office that has only one office code, Tennyson 4.
Tennyson 4, 2121.
Revertive pulsing was discernible there, but just barely. This next example is a little easier to hear if you're listening with headphones. Here's a supervision test from White Plains 9. That's an exchange name, not a tandem name. Now, with White Plains 1 being installed in 1950, and there being number 1 crossbar in the building, which probably was installed in the 40s, why does it ring like this? See, that's a new ring. It's too new for that era. Well, Bill was curious about that, and so he asked, and what he was told was that the original ringing machine, which I'm pretty sure must have been one of these, was destroyed when the basement got flooded one day. And so that's why they have this more modern sounding or pseudo-modern sounding ring. From the perspective of a Nassau County Crossbar 5 like Lynbrook 3, the long-distance sectors of the 914 area are very hard to discern, and that's because the first choice for all of it is White Plains 1, which, being a 914 specialist, has direct trunks to almost everything. And so it bypasses the long-distance sector tandem for whatever part of the state you're calling. It's got trunks to each of those sector tandems, it just doesn't usually use them. However, when Lynbrook 3's trunks to White Plains are busy, Lynbrook 3 is going to use Hempstead Tandem 3,
5166.
the usual long-distance outlet. Hempstead Tandem 3 doesn't have direct trunks to end offices in the 914 area, so you will get to hear the actual sector tandem for the area that's being called. For example, here is a Crossbar 5 in Nyack, New York. That's in the sector of the Nyack Crossbar Tandem 9146. Here, with a strange on-hook right before the MF sending on the first call, are 2 calls to the Nyack Crossbar 5 at a time when my White Plains trunks were busy, and it goes through Hempstead to Nyack Crossbar Tandem to the Nyack Crossbar 5 end office. The trunks from Hempstead Tandem 3
5166.
to Nyack 9146 on those last 2 calls were N3 family. But Hempstead also had some T-carrier trunks to Nyack. Here's a call to a small step in Tuxedo, New York. This goes through Hempstead Tandem 3 because my White Plains 1 trunks were busy at that time. Hempstead Tandem 3 uses a T-carrier trunk to the Nyack Crossbar Tandem, which then goes out on 2600 controlled carrier to the small step. Now I'll play that call again, naming each office as we cut through to it. Hempstead Tandem 3, Nyack Crossbar Tandem, Tuxedo Step. With my White Plains trunks available again, here's a vacant code recording from one of the Crossbar 5 tandems in the 914 area, and I probably got it by dialing a non-working group in one of their Centrex only codes. White Plains goes through directly to the Crossbar 5, which dumps us into the local vacant code recording.
I'm sorry. We are unable to complete your call as dialed. Please check the number and dial again, or ask your operator for assistance. This is a recording.
The 3 sectors of the 914 area that are farthest away from White Plains are the ones where White Plains 1 finally doesn't have direct trunks to the end offices, so it actually uses the sector tandems for these areas. Those areas are Poughkeepsie, Monticello, and Kingston. Poughkeepsie and Monticello each have a crossbar tandem, 9148 and 9149 are the recording IDs. Kingston has a crossbar 5 tandem, and in every case, White Plains will use the tandem. The only, well, sort of exception is that when we call downtown Kingston, the end office and the tandem are the same switch.
Kingston, Jamaica.
No, Kingston, New York, but they each have a crossbar 5 tandem, so they have that in common. And while we're at it, Jamaica, New York has a crossbar tandem,
21236.
which specializes in calling Nassau.
I'm sorry.
No, not the Bahamas, Nassau County, New York. Boy, this is getting way too confusing. Anyway, here are 2 calls to a number 5 crossbar office in the Kingston sector that has a type of tone plant usually found in small steps, new CDO ring. There are a few number 5 crossbars that have it as well. Both of these calls go to intercept, and White Plains uses the Kingston number 5 crossbar tandem. The tandem noises on these are discernible, but you have to pay attention because they happen real fast. The sound of White Plains cutting through, plus Kingston doing the tandeming operation, is this. And then that's immediately followed by a tick. There, that's Kingston cutting through, plus the destination number 5 crossbar responding.
May I have the number you're dialing?
Testing operator, what city is this?
Kingston.
Thank you.
Welcome. May I have the number you're dialing?
Now, when we call Kingston itself, we're calling the crossbar 5 entity that is the tandem, but we're not using it as a tandem, we're actually ringing in that office.
May I have the number you're calling, please?
339-1111.
Thank you. One moment. 339-1111 is a vacant line. No one has that number.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This next call is to a Centrex-only code in Poughkeepsie. There's a step selector in the Poughkeepsie building which decides what Centrex to connect you to depending upon what 1000 group you dial. If you dial a non-working 1000 group, you'll get this recording. The route for this call is White Plains 1 to Poughkeepsie crossbar tandem,
9148.
which dials into the Poughkeepsie step selector.
I'm sorry. We are unable to complete your call as dialed. Please check the number and dial again, or ask your operator for assistance. This is a recording. 9148. I'm sorry. We are unable to complete your call as dialed. Please check the number and dial again, or ask your operator for assistance. This is a recording. 9148.
That shouldn't say 9148. Actually, later, they changed it to 914 PST, I think standing for Poughkeepsie Step Tandem. The 9148 ID belongs to the Crossbar Tandem in Poughkeepsie. The next two calls are to the Crossbar 5 in downtown Monticello, and White Plains 1 does not have direct trunks, so it sends it over N1 carrier to Monticello Crossbar Tandem, recording ID 9149. We get a really noisy trunk from White Plains up to Monticello. Here's one more. This has a more reasonable trunk to the Monticello Crossbar Tandem, and when it goes to intercept, the recording flutters less than the one in Yonkers.
I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. This is a recording.
On those last three calls to Monticello, you could actually hear the Monticello Crossbar Tandem being used. Two ta-da-da sounds. White Plains cutting through, and then Monticello cutting through. White Plains didn't have direct trunks to Monticello's Crossbar 5 office, so it used the Crossbar Tandem up there. White Plains doesn't have direct trunks to Lake Huntington either. That's a New York telephone 355 step in the Monticello sector. Here are two calls to that office. On the first one, we get a very quiet trunk to Monticello, which then gets a 2600 controlled trunk to the end office. You could really hear those three links, all of them N carrier. I think the White Plains to Monticello is N1. Not absolutely sure, but when he answered, Plutida. That's really cool. Now here's a vacant level in that same step CDO, but this time we get that super noisy trunk between White Plains and Monticello.
I'm sorry. We are unable to complete your call as dialed. When calling long distance, please dial a 1 or 0 first. Dialing instructions are in the front of your directory. If you need assistance, hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording. I'm sorry. We are unable to complete your call as dialed. When calling long distance, please dial a 1 or 0 first. Dialing instructions are in the front of your directory. If you need assistance, hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording. I'm sorry. We are unable to complete your call as dialed. When calling long distance, please dial a 1 or 0 first. Dialing instructions are in the front of your directory. If you need assistance, hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording.
That covers all the calls to New York Telephone, i.e. Bell System points, that I made in August 1974, but I also called some independents.
Number dialed requires assistance. Please hold.
Or ask the Walden operator for assistance. This is a recording.
Those will begin the next program. Calls in this program have been restored from the original flawed tapes and should not be used as a reference for amplitude and EQ of the actual network. In reconstructing these calls, I used material from a touch-tone line in my neighborhood. My parents never paid for touch-tone.